Great. Well, thank you so much, Mo, the Upstart crew, for helping get this thing set up and doing this. So hi, everyone. My name is Nigel Sharp, CEO, co-founder of Aquagga, and here today to sort of give a session on customer discovery, the importance of helping find your customer, and in utilizing some of the best tools and techniques that I've been exposed to in relation to customer discovery. So I'm actually calling in today from the Pacific coast of the USA. So I'm over near Seattle in Washington State. It is 5 or 6 o'clock in the morning, so forgive me if I'm not fully fresh and awake. But originally from the UK, and have had an opportunity to really engage with startups globally, with a number of different sort of facets of different startup interests. And a lot of that was sort of in my bio prior to this session. But just by way really quickly of background, a lot of what I've done is work with a number of tech startups in a broad range of fields. And what I've learned through years of doing that, and at this point, having worked closely with 300 or 400 companies and probably seen over 2,000 pitches in the last 5 years, is that one of the core missing facets of so much of the work that startups do is really taking the time to discover and understand the customer journey, the customer buying process, the customer, and a number of other things related to the customer. I've learned this the hard way. My first tech company was based out of Armenia, Bulgaria. So we're over there, sort of an Eastern European side. And we, had a great technology that was very exciting. People were very excited with the stuff we were able to do. And a lot of people were very excited to yeah, it's a really cool startup and it's really great. And we even raised some money and raised some venture capital. We eventually opened up a third office in Boston, in the US. Grew the team, did everything else. And I can tell you it was devastating, because in the end, we really learned a valuable lesson. The fact that we were building things and hoping that the customer was going to come at the other end, thinking that the cool technology itself was enough to drive the interest. And we were working with some really cool technology, right? Like voice recognition and gesture control, and utilizing hands and voice to control computers in really cool ways. And don't get me wrong, I've stood on stages around the world, giving amazing presentations, and got people standing up and applauding at their end. But all of that wasn't really great customer feedback. And we spent $3.5 million in that company just to learn one very valuable lesson. And a lot of it came down to something that we could have probably found out in a few 20-minute conversations at the very front end of that thing, without having spent years of my life and an entire company to be built, if I had just gone out and done some customer discovery. So I've, from that moment in my life, vowed to never make the same mistake again. And in the second tech startup I did, was much more involved in actually going through trainings around customer discovery here in the US. And I've been very fortunate that I've been through a couple of programs that in the US are considered to be sort of the elite programs for customer discovery training. Been through accelerators as well that also have a lot of customer discovery components. So, have graduated from a program called Techstars in Boulder, Colorado. And beyond that, also about 7 other accelerator programs at this point I think I've been engaged with. And in addition to that, the National Science Foundation's Innovation Core. And what that program is really about is really deep diving into doing rapid customer discovery for deep technology, hard technology companies, companies that are often spinning out of university environments where you've got, really sort of great potential technology applications, but you just don't quite know where it fits or how it's going to fit into the market. And unfortunately, what I've learned through that process is that the actual skill set is really applicable to pretty much every startup that's out there, everybody who's interested in ideas and is interested in following forward. So I really don't want to be just a talking head for all of this. So I don't know what level of exposure folks have to customer discovery, and I want to make this somewhat of an interactive conversation. So I really want to encourage you guys to throw those questions and mark them to everyone in the chat, so that we can just jump onto things as stuff comes up and people that are interested in specifics. I'm happy to tell more stories in relation to customer discovery journeys that I've been on. And then I'm going to probably run through a few tips and techniques of some of the core facets around customer discovery. So I've got a couple of slides. I think we're going to try some slides, if that's okay, and see if that kind of works, because hopefully that might spur some conversation and discussion around this. And then we can go forward from there. So let me see if I can pull one of these up and make this actually work. 1 second. That one. Click. Maybe. Okay. So, so guys, yeah, I mean, a lot of this, there's 2 pictures here, and I think usually in a more interactive workshop, I would ask, like, you know, what's the difference between these 2 pictures? I don't know if I can quite get that that feedback from you guys, but I'd love to see if anyone's actually listening. So yeah, what is the difference between these 2 pictures, and why build this and not that? You know. So one includes the market in the frame. That's interesting. Yep. That's it, right? So it is building a technology to get somewhere versus building a technology to nowhere, right? Or building your startup to nowhere. And that's a really big challenge, right? That was the entirety of my first experience for years in startups. Because yeah, going out to that empty void and hoping that your technology will somehow land at the other end is a really common mistake. Now, look, I know I'm not the first person telling you this, because I got told this when I started my company so many times. Everyone's like, well, listen to your customer and find the market and do this stuff. And I mean, this stuff was professed to me. I heard it all. I nodded my head. I agreed with people, and I didn't listen. So, because I didn't think it really applied to me. And this was because my technology was cooler than everybody else's. And like, you know, because what we were doing was like more impactful than everybody else's, and everybody else's stuff kind of like, you know, was okay. But our stuff was just like, you know, so sexy. Like, of course the world was going to like adopt our stuff. So it's really easy to get into this, like, you know, mindset of building a really glamorous bridge that you think is going to be super valuable, and you know, you get really good at building stuff. But unfortunately, you know, you often end up in this really, you know, tough position of trying to find out that at the other end there is no other end. You haven't figured out where it's actually going to go. And sadly, in startup land, as you guys have probably figured out already, for those who have been more experienced in this realm, you often do need to sort of try and figure out, you know, you often have to like adjust the direction of where you need to go based upon the feedback that you receive, right? So therefore, that other location that you're trying to reach to is, you know, is not always clearly defined at the very front. So a lot of this stuff is covered really well, and I apologize for the layout of these slides, but a lot of this stuff is covered really well in a tool called the business model canvas. And for those who aren't familiar with it, it's a really interesting tool that is often utilized incorrectly. Would be my general advice to this. A lot of people will do a business model canvas exercise where they fill in these 9 boxes. And they'll work their way through this, and often thll sit down and do this for like 10-15 minutes with their company. They'll do it as part of an accelerator program or something, and they go like, ta-da, that's our business model canvas, and we're great. I can tell you from experience that most of the teams that I've worked with through business model canvassing, it takes somewhere between 6 months to 2 years to actually fill out this document and really work it through, for a lot of startups who are intentionally working at it almost every single day. And that's an incredible amount of investment and time. But the difference, and the night and day difference of having a really well filled out business model canvas versus one that isn't, is super clear to anyone who's actually been exposed to enough of these things. But on the business model canvas, because I don't have enough time today to really go into like a deep dive session on business model canvassing and the rest of it, there are really some very important, particular features of that. And when we talk about customer discovery, we're primarily talking about 2 boxes on the business model canvas. We're talking about what is the thing of value that we provide, right? So what is it we do, and what value do we provide, and to whom do we provide it, right? So which customer segments do we provide it to? And to give you some examples of what a good value proposition and a good customer segment is, we need to really sort of like, you know, deep dive into a little bit more of our understanding of, of those customers that are out there. And I really want to go back and address one of the questions here, because a lot of folks go, well, how do I even identify who those early customers are? And this is a really, really interesting point, because on the business model canvas, a lot of the conversation out there, a lot of the books, a lot of the recommendations, a lot of the training materials around this often start by talking about what you do and what value you provide, right? I can tell you from experience, having worked with hundreds of teams at this point, it is actually really hard to start from that box because it's a lot, and it's actually not necessarily the best place to start on the business model canvas. And I actually recommend for most people trying to figure out who you help first, right? And who can you help, and who are you motivated to help? Who do you care about? So one of the things that I love, one of my mentors always told me was the challenges with doing a lot of customer discovery is that sometimes you find out you don't like your customers. There are a lot of customers out there that you just don't necessarily care about or want to serve, right? So actually finding people that you care about, that you want to serve, that you want to be providing value to is hugely important. And when we talk about sort of how do we find our early customers, or how do we identify the best early customers for a new technology? Well, first of all, make sure you identify the people that you want to help, right? The people that you care about, the other people that actually got problems and care about some of this stuff that's going on. So yeah, I think the way that you do that, in my experience, and a lot of the customer discovery work that we've done, is getting out of the building, right? Like not sitting around, not Googling it, not trying to sit around in sessions like this, listening to the Nigels of the world, trying to tell you how to do it. You get out of the building, you're going to start doing it. You got to start talking to people, and you try and find people that you think you might care about, right? So everybody has a bit of a gut feeling around this, but they feel that maybe their technology or their startup application or their service might have applications in a field or an industry that they have some affinity to, right? So and therefore you might go to a conference or a trade show related to that. It's funny how many startups actually end up trying to serve other startups, for example, because a lot of startups know the startup industry, so they hang out with other startups and start telling them about what they do as a starting point, as an example, right? But for a lot of other folks that are out there, going out and doing this, trade shows, conferences, large sort of seminars, meetings can be a great place to go and start learning to identify with who the customer is. And what we're looking for when we think about customer segments is we're looking to try and figure out the job title of the person that we're engaging with, right? The job title, the type of company they're part of, and really sort of honing into who that customer is, right? So customer segments on this business model canvas shouldn't be just laid out in a very simplistic manner. A lot of people go my customer segment is the military, or my customer segment is office workers, or some sort of really big generic bubble that tries to capture a huge demographic, or a major industry. Industries are not the correct answer to these boxes, right? The correct answer to these boxes are job titles and this type of company, with a very specific thing. And it's not oh, my job is just to sell to the CEOs of those companies. Is it really? Have you spoken to the CEOs? Are the CEOs actually making those decisions? Or is it, somebody a bit further down in the company who's actually making those buying decisions? And a lot of that comes through doing customer discovery interview work and going out there. And through that and through those conversations, do we start understanding the things that they value, the things that concern them and they care about, and that helps us start thinking about value propositions as well. And all of that is way more valuable to figure out than what is it that you do and how you think it's going to be valuable to the world. Other than those things, good starting premises or good starting hypotheses, right? And the way that I've learned to really approach this stuff is in a very sort of scientific method. And for those who are technical, you guys will probably appreciate the power of utilizing a scientific method. But for those folks who are not so familiar with it, what we're really trying to do is develop hypotheses or ideas around what we think people might want, and then we actually go and try and do validation work to actually validate and confirm our hypotheses through scientific inquiry, right? And in customer discovery purposes, that primarily means primary based interviews, right? Going out there and actually talking to people, ideally in person, but in the modern world of COVID and everything else, if we can, we jump on Zoom, and who knows, maybe one around Gather Town and go and engage with people to figure things out. So I've seen a couple of good questions in the chat. How to approach BTC customers. I don't know what BTC is. Business to consumer customers, is that what it is? Okay, all right, got it now. That threw me off. Job applicants, they usually don't write that in LinkedIn. Oh, interesting. Okay, yeah, it's a great question, right? So it's how do you get past sometimes demographics and groups that you think are going to be important? how do you get over to that crowd when that crowd isn't just like naturally gathered somewhere where you can go and kind of like just go find them, right? And that's very true. Well, let me ask you that question back, right? Like, where do you find a bunch of people like that are job applicants that you would maybe be able to go and like talk to and engage with? And Thorsten, if you want, I mean, we could like spotlight you and bring you up, and we can have a quick chat about it, because I think this is really good to have real examples. I don't know if well, we could maybe do that.
Mm-hmm.
I can stop sharing for a second.
All right.
Hi there.
Hey.
So yeah, so my challenge is that I have this specific target group, and I have some strategies to have a podcast and people contact me based on that, but it's not the scale. I need to get into contact with more people and get their opinion, what their needs are. And yeah, basically I haven't come up with a good idea or a good strategy to do that.
Where are those people? I mean, what are people doing right now?
Oh, they're looking for jobs.
I know they're looking for jobs. Where are they? Like, how do they do that?
You mean they could be globally, and they do it probably online and on LinkedIn, or maybe on Monster, or yeah.
Okay. Would it be relevant for you to talk to people that are doing it offline?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I mean, it's funny because I went to a conference just last week, here in the US, in Chicago. It was a couple of weeks ago. And I mean, as part of that conference, they had like a job fair, or a job sort of recruitment event that was happening, as part of that sort of conference, a subsection of that conference. And I wonder, like, for the purpose of what you're trying to discover and figure out, could you just go and look at like a larger conference that isn't a job fair focused conference, maybe, but maybe it's just a subsection of a conference for a specific industry that's of relevance, and just go and like do a bunch of interviews in one go, like right there while people are walking around looking and actively doing that, because those people have already self-selected, right? So finding a self-selection pool is really great. Now that is, could be a fairly expensive exercise depending if you have to travel and engage at a conference where people are looking for jobs. But it's amazing because right now we're going through the Great Resignation, right? We're having all these people that are like trying to like just to look for jobs. Everyone's out there like trying to plug in and figure out how to engage in their job hunt. And yet you're just trying to talk to some of those people and try and figure out like, what it is that they, they value the most in that process and everything else, and trying to sort of validate some of the technology. I actually think that your inbound marketing technique of a podcast type application actually is not a bad technique. The danger there is, are you just helping people try and like, have that conversation, or are you actually trying to promote a service or a tool? Because that's the danger, right? Like, if you're just genuinely putting out value, then yes, you could go on there. And I mean, I've had some really great success with some teams who have used things like Quora, for example. I don't know if you're familiar with Quora. It's a really great Q&A platform online. People have actually managed to get like some good connections and contacts there, where it's like you can follow up with somebody and say, hey, would you be willing to like jump on a quick call? Love to learn a bit more about your stuff. The hard part is people feel you're trying to sell them off things in that kind of situation. And I think that's probably where you're having a lot of the friction, is that people don't want to get sold and either deal with like a recruiter, because what they really want is they want to go out and like find a job. But what you're hearing is that what they're valuing, right? They don't want to get distracted. So there's actually some inferred data for the fact that you're having a hard time connecting with them that you can probably take out some like valuable understandings from.
Right.
Yeah. It's not easy though, right? It's like it's when you've got groups like that, and especially when you've got groups in the general thing, it's so much easier to apply some of these principles in B2B environments where we're looking at like trying to understand businesses and engage that. And the consumer base, it's like, I've often said to people, like, if you want to go find consumers, you just go stand in like, the shopping mall or the shopping center, and you just talk to people that are walking down. I mean, it might be a bit more brute force, but you can meet people that way, right? And you just go and keep stopping people until you get there. It's amazing how much of the hustle can happen in that realm.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, just don't want to hijack it, but people actually sign up for my app for the free trial when they come from my podcast, but then I don't get them to give me any feedback how I can improve it. And that's the next challenge, right? But yeah, sorry, I don't want to take over this session here.
No, I mean, this is what the session's for, right? I'm here to give my time, and you just happen to be the one asking questions. If other people ask questions, they give them their time too. I'm very, I don't believe in egalitarian teaching, I'm just like, yeah, whoever wants to grab me, grab me. So yeah, so it's a really great question though. So what do you do, and what happens when you can't get good feedback on that? So it's to me that's a different stage of discovery, and that's really much more about a product development and a feedback loop, and how do you create like better user experience. There is some really interesting tools and techniques that exist out there for adding on to give you some more visibility on what people are doing in the app, like where are they spending time, in getting some data right back. But what are you doing to incentivize them to give the time to give you that data back, right? And it's funny, I just saw a company recently, we're just incentivizing for a little bit of feedback, like, here's a $10 Starbucks card if you can spend like a few minutes to give us some feedback on something. And it's like, I don't have a few minutes even for $10 Starbucks card. I'm not a huge Starbucks fan. That probably doesn't help. But for some people, I can see.
I tried with Amazon, but that didn't work either.
Yeah, right. I mean, yeah. So you tried Amazon card, it doesn't work. Right? You're right, because like people are so. But you know what people really love, and what I've learned people really love, is they love to be listened to. Actually, feel like they're going to get listened to. And what I've actually found is it's amazing how a lot of these digital techniques and digital feedback forms and more surveys like don't excite people. And the stuff you'll get the minimum. I mean, surveys are terrible, right? Because you send a survey to somebody, and all you'll get is they'll fill in the boxes as quickly as they can so they get the Starbucks card or the Amazon card. They don't care at all. There's no like human interaction. Whereas if you tell the story that you're telling right now, which is like, look, I'm putting a lot of time into this. I'm really trying to build something valuable. And I'd love to engage with you on it, and it sounds like you've already got a platform to have that conversation with people through a podcast, and I think you have that very vulnerable attitude of like, look, I'm actually in a position where I really need to get some more feedback on this. And if you guys could take some time for that, it'd be really great. And I'm really willing to listen and like hear about your experiences with this, and maybe give the opportunity for that person to be heard. You'd be surprised at how many people just want to be heard in the world, like, because they are frustrated, like, and I mean, job applicants are like, you got some of the most peak frustrated people there that probably have a lot of things to talk about. They may not want to be on a podcast to talk about it. They may want to just have a private conversation, but that's perfectly reasonable. And that's what I would encourage. It's like, use the channels that you already have to encourage people to have that, like, somewhat vulnerable conversation, but also just empathize with them, and share, your experiences and challenges there. And you'd be surprised at how many people resonate with that stuff. But engagement is tough on many fronts, and especially when it comes down to, new feedback and new product development. I'll see if I can get a bit more into that, like, a bit further into the session. I'm mindful of time, but
right.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
You're very welcome. Right. How do we get into a meeting without priming them in regards to the topic you want them to talk about? Oh, Elias, you're asking the magic question regarding customer discovery. Okay. Well, let me see if I've got a slide here that talks about that. I might not. I think I do somewhere. Let me see. Yeah. Okay. So this is really, really important. So the cool thing about the customer discovery work that I've done is that at this point, I've probably sat with teams, and I'm way over 1,000 interviews at this point in different industries. But in my most recent company, the company I'm currently the CEO of, we've done about 270 customer discovery interviews. And out of those 270, I would say 250 of those, we did not tell anybody what we were working on. And that was actually a lot of the ruling around this. You just aren't allowed to tell people what you work on. And that's a really, really powerful way to get the best unbiased data in this, because if we really talk about the sort of scientific method and approach to this stuff, you don't want to bias your data prior to you receiving it, because human beings are really, really annoying. Like the problem is you tell a human being you're working on something, and there's only one of two responses, which is like, oh, that sounds really great. Good luck with that. That sounds really cool, right? Because they don't want to discourage you. Like people don't generally go around and discourage you. Or it's of no interest to them, in which case, like, they feel like you're trying to sell them on something, so they automatically shut you down because they don't want to be sold, right? So both of those are not very good data points, and then those are very predictable. So when you don't tell people what you're working on, you end up with this interesting curiosity that gets formed, but you also end up with like getting to hear some genuine and real feedback. So often what we do, and I've seen the best success with, is I've often worked with teams, and the programs that we've run have been in conjunction with universities quite commonly. And we've been able to sort of wear like a quasi-university hat. Like we're doing some research, we're doing some market research. We don't say customer discovery, because customer discovery automatically puts them into the mindset like, uh-oh, am I a customer? Like, I don't want to be a customer. I don't want to, that's immediate turn off, right? But doing some market research from a university, this is a study. I mean, we were very fortunate because, we're doing stuff for the National Science Foundation. So we're like, well, look, we're working for the National Science Foundation. We're doing a rapid research study right now. We're producing a report in the next couple of weeks. It's going to be really exciting to kind of get some data. We're trying to speak to industry leaders or business leaders that have some exposure and experience with this. Would you be willing to take a few minutes to talk to me in regards to, into the work that you do? Oh, yeah, sure. Happy to talk to you. Happy to engage with you. But I don't think I'm the right person. Oh, why do you not think you're the right person? Right now, you got a conversation started, right? And that person's like, well, because I don't make any decisions, regarding, buying stuff, and they're already trying to figure out what we're doing. It's like, oh, well, we really don't want to tell you what we're doing because we were scared about biasing the data. It's kind of just like, our process right now. But I'm more than happy to have a quick interview with you for a few minutes, ask you a few questions, and I'd be happy to tell you about what we do at the end of this conversation, if that's okay. And that's kind of the technique that I've applied, and I've done this now for hundreds of interviews, and it works really well. People are usually really okay with, as long as you tell them it's going to be a delayed gratification, they're going to hear about it at the other end of the conversation, they're okay to wait for a few minutes. And it usually helps lower the barriers of resistance, because at that point, then it's like, well, I just want to listen to you. And they're like, okay, well, I don't mind talking. So usually they're quite happy to, to then start opening up a little bit. But it takes a lot to, get people to open up and engage with that. But getting into meeting someone without priming them is a huge part. And that is exceptionally hard in the world of virtual meetings, right? So in an in-person meeting, that technique that I just provided works pretty well. You go up, I'm doing a rapid research study. Someone's like, what's it about? You're like, broadly about this industry, right? And I think it'd be great to speak to you. And then that's usually enough to get a conversation started. But much harder if you do that via an email, right? Like an email does not open doors, right? Customer discovery is brutal, right? I mean, we sent 100 emails, and you might get 5 people that reply back and 2 people you set up meetings with. The conversion rate on customer discovery interviews is hard at times. And what I've often found is that, with a lot of it, you really need to work, these networks that you can, and try and get warm introductions and get connectors. There are super connectors in every industry that know people that can open doors. And what's really discouraging about it is it's the first few interviews that are the hardest to get. But once you've had the first few interviews, those usually open the doors to the next few interviews, and it gets a lot easier. So from experience, what we used to do is we were required as part of the I-Corps in the US to go through about 100 interviews in 6 weeks was the requirement, which means you generally have a pace of about 15 interviews a week, right? And that doesn't sound like a lot, but they were supposed to be all in person, right? And with the travel and getting on planes and going around, so it's really cool. In the US, any company can get $50,000 from the government to just go and travel around and talk to people and talk to customers. It's kind of really, really cool. Gotta love America for some of these things. So it's really nice, right? It's travel money, bunch of free air miles. You get to go around, talk to people at conferences. Kind of cool. And actually, you can even travel globally as well. So I've been to international conferences, so it's kind of cool. I haven't figured out yet how to get all my customer discovery to happen in Hawaii. I always feel I'm going to random places, but it's okay. I mean, I did send one team to Hawaii though, but they had a legitimate reason for going. It was funny though. I've sent so many teams to Las Vegas, and I've always questioned those ones. But anyway, what was I going to say? Yeah. So anyway, 100 interviews in a few weeks can be really, really intense because you've got to pre-set up some of these calls, try and set up some of these meetings, try and do that. And I would tell you that it's the first 15, 20 that are the brutally hardest. Once you get past that, they start flowing a lot better. You start getting more and more introductions to more and more people. People go oh yeah, we should speak to these other 3 people in our team. And you go and interview all of them. And it's very quick to walk in. I'll give you guys an example of one of my very first experiences of this. We were trying to interview people at data centers, right? And I don't know how much you guys know about IT data centers, but data centers are generally secured facilities. These are hard environments necessarily speak to people. We wanted to speak to some of the IT server manager type people that were kind of doing data center work. So we had to do the interviews, and the requirement at I-Corps was to get 6 interviews done that day. And we only had 3 hours out of the building. So it's a very intensive boot camp, right? So he's you have 3 hours. So, the 3 of our team were calling Ubers. We're just Ubering to the nearest data centers that are available on Google Maps, and then showing up to these secured buildings and standing at the gate and literally trying to catch people as they were leaving and going into work, and saying, hey, can I ask you a few questions? And people were, pretty rude and saying no way. I was kicked out of one facility by security and escorted off premises. One of the, I mean, so, some of these people were very, very, very insecure about this stuff. But what we ended up finding out was that going to the data centers was a terrible idea. And we got really discouraged. We couldn't get a single interview, and we were like 2 hours into this thing. We had no interviews, and like nothing was happening. But we found out that all of the data centers are managed by like corporate headquarters that actually weren't that far away. So then we just like, taxied over to the corporate headquarters, walked in and just said like, oh, look, we're kind of interested to talk to somebody like from the sales team regarding some of the data center provisioning or whatever. Oh, you want to talk to somebody from sales for data center stuff? Yeah, sure. More than happy. Here's somebody, blah, blah, blah. Next minute, we already got like, our first interview. The sales guy then realizing that we're not actually trying to buy anything, but we're trying to learn more. Well, let me go and introduce you to the next 3 other people of the company. And then, we ended up getting like 7 or 8 interviews all done in a row within one building, just by walking around and talking to folks. So it's incredible how, again, those first interviews can be the hardest and the most discouraging to really get through into, but it becomes an awful lot easier as you do more of it. So I'm mindful of time. I want to see if there's more like questions and conversation that we kind of want to have here. And did that answer your question, Elias? I guess that's my other question to you. So, or did it help answer your question? Yeah. Yeah, so much of this stuff is just like, get out there and do it, and you get better at it. And unfortunately, it's one of those like really hard things to tell people to do, because it's the most uncomfortable thing. At the beginning, it's filled with the uncomfort and failure and like awkward conversations. But at some point, I can tell you, like everything, it becomes habit and skill, to the point now where I'm like, working in startup land, and I don't realize that when I'm talking to people, I'm automatically kind of doing customer discovery interview work. I'm already trying to validate components of my business model, and it gets more advanced, right? So initially you're just trying to figure out value proposition and who the right customer segment is, that value proposition. But as you go further along, you start like, having conversations around pricing, and then like, what we call cost structure on the business model canvas. Or we start trying to understand more about like how the specific channels to market actually operate and work for those different business entities, and like how they sit into the overall channel decision-making capacity, etc. And who are the key partners within the organizations that they utilize. So you start like constantly trying to validate more and more of your understanding around the business model. And it's really interesting because in my company in Colorado, or my prior company, we were in a position where and it was really hard for us to believe this, but we started understanding the industry better than the industry understood the industry, right? Like, because we just talked to people more than the industry had actually talked to each other for so many years. And we found a value proposition, we found a problem that multi-billion-dollar companies just weren't aware of. They hadn't been listening. Like, they have all these salespeople, all these trade shows, and they hadn't been listening to each other. And we found that problem, and from that, our company raised about $14 million within like the next year, and is currently still growing in Denver, Colorado. It's not my company right now; it's my previous company, but I mean, it's still growing in Colorado and doing stuff. And it's because it just found this one little value proposition that, like, by the way, nobody was listening to. But we did about 140 interviews over 6 or 7 weeks, and we found 40 or 50 people all said the same small thing. It came up again and again and again. And it was really fascinating. It was like, well, here's something that's like kind of important. And it seemed so obvious. It was like, well, surely that's what's being done. But then we went and talked to all the companies who were providing the services. And none of them were doing that, because like, they just didn't offer that, thing. It was like, well, there's an opportunity, right? And it didn't take long for us to start maximizing and growing that opportunity. So I love the process, because, it's amazing how most of the world is not listening to one another. How everybody's got their own idea and they're trying to go out there, and like, some startup founders and some of the people in this room are talented, natural salespeople who can go out there and like feel that they can like promote what they're doing so well. They just got to convince people to do that. And I'm telling you from experience that if you've got that natural ability, you will get some people to convert over. You will do that, and you will convince some people, and that's fine. But you're working way harder than you need to work. Like, and I am just like, I'm so much more lazy when it comes to startups now. I'm at a point now where I'm just not interested in doing that much work. And I spend all of my time, and like, for the current company, we've done hundreds of interviews now. We've maximized everything we've done from Colorado, and we're making, progress even faster than I was making that previous company. And simply just due to the fact that, we recognize that the biggest thing is, just taking that few minutes to like listen to people. The answers are already out there. The needs and the requests and the desires are already very well defined by people in their minds. You find out what is keeping people up at night, what's worrying them. It is really, really easy from that moment on to sort of like, move forward and adjust your product or adjust your service to really serve them. But going back to the very first point I made, make sure that you actually like serving those people, right? Those people are actually people that you care about, that you want to see, you actually want to help, because it's very easy to fall into, like, the problem with customer discovery is I've now been in so many industries, right? I went to conferences last year in the dental sphere, in the mining sphere, in the oil and gas sphere, in the deep tech, AI sphere and whatever. And you stand up with these different and financial tech, and like I've realized, like, I don't want to serve bankers, like I don't care about people in banks, like and I just don't care about the financial community, like I don't want to do that. Other people do, but it's great, but I don't like those people, so like I don't want to serve them. Right now I'm working in the water industry, and I really like the water industry. Like I really like the people. They're very down to earth. They really care about like public health. They care about like providing people with clean water. I can jive with this crowd. I'd like to try and help them out with some stuff. And there's a lot of other people in the world that's like, don't like them that much. Don't really necessarily want to dedicate my time and my nights to serving those folks. And I like you guys. That's why I decided to wake up at 5 o'clock this morning to come and help out. I like startup people. So
Nigel, I have a question for you.
So Mara, are we out of time? And how should we wrap this up? I don't know exactly where we are.
We have a couple of minutes left, but if you want to do some questions now, I guess we can do that.
Some questions, yeah.
I have a question for you. Can you guys hear me, by the way?
Yes, let me spotlight you real quick.
All right.
Is it Vin who's trying to speak?
Yeah. Nice to see you again, Nigel. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
It's
fun. It was fun to be in Uppsala just a couple of weeks ago. It's like a bit of a whirlwind, yeah.
Yeah, I had to travel away those days that you were here, your last couple of days. But I'm sorry I missed you. This is quite interesting, the type of, because it seems like you go out and look for what are problems that needs to be solved, rather than coming up with something and then trying to sell that onto other people. But I mean, so that's a really interesting approach. But but it also sounds like a really difficult task to do all of those interviews, according to, I guess you're using the business model canvas or lean startup methodology, kind of, when you do so. But how do you like approach it when you ask for an interview? Do you just say, hey, I would like to solve some of your problems that you have, but I would just like to know what exactly needs to be solved? Or are you saying that, hey, I think I can solve some of your issues here as a salesperson, for instance? I mean, it's different approaches. So I'm just curious about how you go on in these earlier stages.
Yeah, it's fascinating because it's one of the constant questions like, well, how do I get the interview? And again, I've already given the answer today, which is like, just get out of the building and start talking to people. Like, you really just, start talking to people. You get that, but you're like, well, yeah, but I really, want like a meaningful interview. I want to find the right person. What do we do? So there's a few techniques that really help with this. I've got a slide here that will help. Let's see if that works. So how to conduct interviews, that your useful data, and then how do you get those interviews? So before the interview, there's a huge amount of like preparation work that you can do as a startup, like prior to going into an interview. And one of these things that's really, really important is coming up with some value proposition hypotheses prior to going out and talking to a particular customer, right? The danger of this stuff is it sounds like what I'm doing is like I'm just shotgunning, I'm going out there and just talking to anyone and everyone who wants to talk to me. And it sounds like it's like the introvert's nightmare, right? Like an introvert would like literally panic, like the idea of like, oh, I want to go out and like randomly talk to people. And I used to be fairly introverted, right? So I get that. And an extrovert's probably like, oh, this is the most energizing thing ever. I should just go out and like just start speaking to everybody, like, yay. But the reality is that most people are pretty boring, and like most people don't have a whole lot of like value, until you actually know kind of what you're trying to do. So you got to have some identification around this. And what I've often like found that works really well is to identify a hypothesis first. And we haven't talked today really about like how do you form a really good value proposition hypothesis, but it's looking for some key characteristics. Ideally, something of value for a specific segment that you think is going to solve either a pain they have or provide them with some sort of gain, and you can quantify that pain or quantify that gain, right? And that's a whole conversation around like value proposition hypothesis generation, which sadly we don't have time for. But having a bit of an idea of what the value you think could be then it's a matter of like going out there and trying to understand like, who the customer segments are. And like, it's really obvious stuff. Like, it's just, you don't have to overthink it. It goes back to the same question, like, how do we find job applicants? Well, they're at job fairs and they're like searching on like forums, like find job stuff. And they're going to online like meetups that are related to like finding jobs. I mean, they're going to where those people are. And like, in the case of your company, I don't know specifically, what type of customers you're specifically trying to look for, but let's say it's like, I'm going to pick something, but let's say, you're looking for a distribution company that's really focused in on like, using like compostable or easily defined, compostable goods and materials, for environmentally friendly like catering applications, right? So it's an environmentally friendly catering company or something, and you want to go engage with that. It's like, where are you going to find those people? And it's like, there's going to be, specific trade shows where they're going to be at. And, and the idea there is to try and figure out who the customers are up front. And you're like, well, I want to speak to procurement manager. A lot of times it's like, well, procurement manager would be the person, right? Like, it's a pretty common title, right? Like, at least here in the US, somebody's in charge of buying stuff. So like, that could be the person. For smaller companies, there isn't going to be a procurement person. There's going to be some sort of executive or some sort of like, senior manager that's going to be sitting there. And those are your customers that you're trying to sort of identify. It's a little bit of that, but I wanted to answer your question specifically on like, well, how do you get that introduction done? How do you like kind of do those things? And this slide is very effective for like in person. It's less good for virtual. And I really want to like touch on both of those things because we've definitely modified some of that. And I just don't happen to have any new slides for the virtual right now. I stopped teaching this stuff a little while ago and started working on a startup. But I did spend a lot of time helping virtual teams do this work. And I will say that it's really simple stuff again, right? It's like simple introductions, giving someone, be careful with business cards. It's very tempting to give someone a business card, but that already starts biasing the conversation. So be careful with that. But yeah, simple stuff like shaking their hand, making simple eye contacts, taking some interest, thanking the time for the time they're taking out of the day prior to even like having the conversation, flattering them on like, what they're doing, how nice, if you're at a trade show, how nice their booth is, how refreshing it is to be there, how like you love their, like, if you can see their smile behind a mask, like, how great, like you appreciate the fact they're still smiling. Little things like that just helps start a conversation, right? And it's like simple, basic human kind of like conversational, techniques and trips. But the most important thing is framing that conversation. And framing the conversation is, again, I would really encourage you guys to try techniques like, hey, I'm out doing a rapid research study right now, and trying to really sort of gather data from, get some market insights that we can compile into a really interesting report. And sometimes like that they're like, well, that sounds great, but I'm busy. And then you need to like sometimes like hook them with something, right? Like offer them something back. And I always try and like see what I can offer them. And what I'd be happy to do is once we've done these report, and maybe really put together a report, and I've done this for like lots of people, you go out and interview a lot of people and like, well, what we're going to do is basically just create a one-page report at the other end. And I'm happy to share that with you, like once we're done in a few weeks, we'll be happy to share that back if you're willing to share your contact details at the end of the interview, right? Now somebody's getting free market intelligence data, right? And in their mind, it's free because usually you pay a lot of money for these reports, right? And like suddenly they're getting like free market intelligence data on their industry or their segment. And they're going to hear what other people think. And all they've got to do is give you a few minutes of time to hear what other people think. Well, people are usually very interested in that, right? So that's usually a really great technique to actually like get an interview locked in place. Is just offer them something, right? And like people care. I mean, we've talked about this already. People don't care about Starbucks cards and Amazon gift cards for a few bucks because they're trying to like evaluate their time versus the cost of a card, and it doesn't like work very well. But people have a harder time putting direct value on like a market research report that's going to be very customized, that they're going to get like a great insight that they might even be featured in. Oh my God, like, that's like super cool. Like, I'd love to be part of that, right? Or like, we're going to do, there's other things you can sort of do, like, oh, we're going to host an event, like, to sort of recap on some of this stuff, and we're going to be holding that, and I would love to like maybe have you come by and, and join us at that event at another point, and like, we'll be giving some special guest passes to that event for those folks who commit to this kind of thing. So, make somebody a bit more of a VIP, etc. I mean, lots of very simple techniques that can like, hook people in if they need to be incentivized. And I mean, I would tell you from experience, having done, whatever it is, hundreds and hundreds of interviews, it's only like 20% of people that really need to be incentivized. Most people, if you're just willing to listen to them, that's like incentive enough, but for some people, there's definitely a desire to be incentivized that way. So that's what I would do. I'd frame the conversation, rapid research, doing this thing, who are you doing it for? Why are you doing the research? Well, you know, if you have a way of like, you know, building it in conjunction with some sort of academic institution, that's the easiest way of reducing some of that barrier, right? Like it's really just saying like, we're working with. But if you can, I mean, I would try and obfuscate yourself from the company, Vin, and maybe move over to like saying like, well, I'm doing this as part of like a, you know, I'm part of this larger co-working group, or like a base 10, for example, and like, you know, we're out here doing like rapid research, like, you know, just making it about like some other organization can really help, like, you know, lower that barrier to making people feel so concerned about like, you know, who you are and why your company should get some more information from them, etc. So,
but it's also kind of like a low-key sales conversation, right?
yeah.
In this, because you, yeah,
sorry,
so yeah, and because of that, you kind of in the same conversation also want to low-key ask whether or not they would be interested in buying this and for how much and so on, because that's going to be in the interview questions. So how do you keep that interest without?
I don't have it in my interview questions, so
okay,
I don't ask those. But yeah. So I mean, my interview questions are usually sort of like tailored towards trying to validate specific hypotheses.
Yeah.
And unless you're really trying to evaluate cost structure, which is a specific box on the business model canvas, then in that case, then you might be looking for comparable pricing data. But then, you know, usually it's like, well, how much are you spending right now for other things that you're currently buying? You know, you're trying to evaluate, like, get like market data on what they're currently doing. But getting specifics, like how much are you ready to pay for my product, is an irrelevant question, right? Because they're going to tell you whatever number they think you want to hear. It doesn't help you. Yeah. So a lot of the technique around these kind of questions is really about, like, you know, asking open-ended questions and really deeping down, using, like, you know, using design thinking methodologies around, like, sort of asking the 5 whys, right? Like, you know, ask why, and then ask why again, and then ask why again, and like you really start getting down to the real core of it, like, you know, because most decisions are driven by some sort of human emotional need or driver that comes around this stuff. So really getting that. But the one that I love using the most in these interviews is asking people to tell me a story. Like, tell me a story about when you last had to, like, go out and, like, look for one of these things, and, like, you know, tell me a story about how you guys actually, like, you know, implemented or, like, utilized this new product or service that, you know, you found. Do that. And I mean, you know, going back to the conversation around job applicants from earlier, you know, asking people to tell a story about, like, you know, what's worked really well, and, like, you know, a tool they've enjoyed using versus, like, you know, people are usually very happy to tell you their pain stories and their, like, you know, hardship stories, and they're really happy to sort of share those. And sometimes, like, also they're really positive stories that they've got as well. But, you know, questions where there's yeses and nos, questions where you're specifically asking for data, those things are huge turnoffs, right? You can ask those things like in maybe a later conversation, but I would be careful with those as interview questions, as it were. This is not a survey. I don't run surveys. And I know it's really nice as a startup to go like, well, I want a survey with standard questions, so then I can compile all the data and then I can create a nice graph at the other end. Yeah. I don't do graphs. I don't do surveys. Like, you know, none of that stuff really matters, because it's much better for me to have when I produce pitch decks, you know, for investors, it'd be much more powerful to produce 3 powerful quotes from people with job titles that are relevant in an industry market segment, specifically speaking to a pain or a value proposition, than it is for me to have a data saying, like, I spoke to 130 people and 120 of them said they'll pay, you know, whatever it is, 20 cents for each one of my things. Like, you know, it's like that is like a lot less meaningful than, you know, 3 people saying, like, I can't sleep at night because I'm really worried about, like, you know, the whatever it is that I need to have, right? Like product or service that's going to help me. So yeah. Yeah, I know I've got more slides and more stuff, but I'm not gonna bother you guys too much with this. But, you know, there is a huge component within customer discovery of just learning to listen, doing the opposite of what I've done today, which is being the talking head, but actually spending your time to listen and really, you know, hear what people are, you know, actually saying and where they're worried, and trying to capture that information and note taking it. Ideally, I often recommend doing this with a partner, right? So somebody else who's sitting alongside being the note taker, because it's very easy for you to bias and just take the notes of the things you want to hear and not actually take the notes of everything that's being said. So, yeah, I don't know. I feel like we could either expand out, but Elias, I saw your question about, like, in the digital world, how do you either convert a conversation to an oral one, right? Versus text, and, like, how do you get away from, like, the email, like, nightmare? So in iCore, emails count for 0, so they count how many interviews you get and get, like, 0 points for emails, right? They actually have exactly 0 value for customer discovery purposes, which is really annoying. So you can't get any value there. They also count phone conversations as being worth, like, almost nothing as well, which is kind of cool. They just kind of score the conversations. Whereas I say like an in-person is like kind of worth like 3 points or something, right? Or 5 points or something like that. So yeah, I'd be very careful with it, right? Like on phones, it's very hard to tell what other people are currently doing, how distracted they are, have they got kids running around, what's going on, right? On a video call, it's a lot easier to at least have like that engagement with people. You can sort of see how engaged they are to some extent, but they're probably browsing and also like doing some background shopping and whatever else they're doing and trying to plan the next vacation. But you've got the in the in-person, you've got a more of a focused conversation. But how do you convert them over, right? Like how do you get people that you've reached out to convert into a meeting? It's got easier. Right? Like all I can tell you guys is that it used to be, when I used to tell people how to try and set up a meeting, it was so hard to do, especially with virtual stuff. It was just like, it was very hard to get people to get on a call or whatever because everyone was really resistant. But now, and ever since COVID, I actually found it's got a lot easier, right? People are really willing to jump on a Zoom call. Like you just send them a link and they'll jump onto things. Like people are much, much more comfortable with the technologies. It's a lot easier to utilize these things. And therefore, if anything, it's like, hey, I want to save you the time of reading another long email about what you got. Can we just jump on a quick Zoom call for 10 minutes and do this thing? And make it really easy for them to find a time, right? So I often utilize tools like, I don't know if you guys are familiar with like Calendly, for example, but Calendly is a good scheduling tool. So people, so send them an availability, they can pick something on a calendar, book it in and get a Zoom link all in one platform with a couple of clicks. And it makes it very easy because once you're on their calendar and it's booked in, it's great. But I'm also pretty cheeky, Elias, right? So when I'm doing this like customer discovery and I've got like a time limited window, I send people calendar invites. Like I just, got their email address and I just send them a calendar invite. And you'd be amazed at how many people just like, did we have this planned or whatever? And you're like, yeah, I thought, oh, wait, I might have got it wrong. But anyway, would that time work for you, right? And then it's like, and they're like, sure, and it can be awkward, but again, used to be really hard, but now people are like, well, it's just a Zoom call. They know they can drop off if they need to, so they're not super worried about it. But once you get them on, they'll usually give you a couple of minutes of their time. It's cheeky, but you'd be amazed at who I've met with, especially some of the more harder to reach people. Like it works incredibly well. People do it to me, which is really funny. I've had people do it now to me, and they just send me calendar invites, and I'm like, I don't remember this meeting, and they're like, oh. Yeah, I'm doing some, discovery work and blah, blah, blah and whatever. And I thought somebody, they always come with some random connection, like, and that's what you do, right? You're like, oh, yeah, we, connected on LinkedIn or something. And I wanted to follow up. And, that, and it's like, and you start the conversation with like, I'm not here to sell you anything, right? Just start the conversation with like, I'm not here to sell you anything. And that immediately reduces the fear and the barrier. It's like, oh, okay, what can I do? It's like, well, I'm doing this rapid research study and I just need a few minutes of your time, blah, blah, blah. And, you guys have got this now. And it's like, people go like, oh, sure. Okay. I'm happy to listen for a minute more. And like, would you be, and the more of, that rapport you kind of build, people appreciate hustle. You'd be amazed at how many people really appreciate just going out there and hustling and doing this stuff. Again, introvert's nightmare initially, but I have met I used to work, doing this stuff with a lot of academics. And some of those academics are very introverted people, faculty members of universities who just, they're experts in their space and they feel like they should have all these answers. And you tell them to go out in the building and talk to like industry and people out in the, it's like super uncomfortable for them. And I've seen people that like, can't even speak language very well, like really struggling with this, super introverted. And like within a few weeks, like a transformed human being, like, where they're like, everything, like, they can sort of like strike up conversations in the street. It's just one of those like human muscles. Our ability to like have conversations with one another and like engage with each other is like innate to our human ability to connect. So just, trust in your natural ability to do it. Just it's a skill and a bit of a thing you got to work on.
Sorry to interrupt, Nigel. Do you think we can move it to the speaker lounge now, maybe?
Sure. Do you want to describe to folks what that means? I don't know if you need to tell everybody.
Yes, I will do that. All right, everyone. So I'm thinking we can continue this in the speaker lounge and Q&A spaces. So all you need to do is follow us there. It's to the left and to the right of the stage. So just follow. And if you have a hard time finding anyone, you can just go into the members list to the left and then right click on the person you want to find and then locate on the map and you will see where they are. So yeah, I think we should just.
I'm more than happy to hang out over there for folks that want to like kind of just like deep dive into like their specific problems, or specific questions, or like specific industries. I might have some connections to even just start opening some doors to get you first couple of interviews. Sometimes that helps, So any of that, I'm happy to do that for just a few minutes and hang out over there. So yeah, speaker lounge it is. Let's go lounge for a little bit. That sounds great.
All right. See
Yeah,
you all
thank
there.
you.